The vox crackled with static before the warning came through. Inquisitor Ramiel stood rigid on the command deck of the Eternal Judgment. One hand gripping the rail as red emergency lighting bathed the bridge in crimson. Beyond the reinforced viewports, the void churned with unnatural colors that had no place in real space. Asterion 9 hung like a dead thing against the backdrop of stars, its atmosphere stained with violet streaks that spoke of decades-long corruption. Warp signature detected. The Auspex operator called out, voice tight with barely controlled panic. Magnitude 7 fluctuation. Pattern unrecognized. Position directly ahead, 300 kilometers. Ramiel's jaw tightened beneath his ceremonial skull mask. The Crusade fleet had been purging this system for 6 standard weeks, burning out the taint that had festered in the underhives and forgotten mining colonies. Asterion 9 was supposed to be the last holdout, a simple mop-up operation, before the sector could be declared cleansed. Simple operations never stayed simple. All batteries stand ready, Ramiel commanded. His voice carried the weight of 40 years serving the Ordo Hereticus. Prepare for immediate bombardment on my mark. Whatever crawls through that breach dies before it can draw breath. The tear appeared without ceremony. One moment the void held only the distant shimmer of dying stars. The next, reality split like rotten cloth. The breach wasn't large, barely 10 meters across, but the wrongness of it made veteran crew members turn away, hands trembling as they clutched Aquila pendants and muttered prayers. Through the gap came not the expected tide of demon flesh or the screaming faces of the Neverborn, but 3 small figures tumbling through space as if thrown by an angry god. Magnify, Ramiel ordered. The main display flickered, then resolved. 3 children, no older than 5 or 6 by Imperial standard measurements. They hung suspended in the void, untouched by vacuum or radiation. One with long red hair and a pink dress. Another with blonde pigtails and light blue clothing. The third, black-haired and dressed in green, already had her small fists clenched. None of them wore void suits. None of them should have been alive. Juvenile demon hosts, the Master of Ordnance whispered, making the sign of the Aquila across his chest. The enemy breeds them younger every campaign. Ramiel studied the floating forms with cold precision. They moved with confusion rather than malice, the pink one reaching toward her sisters with obvious distress. The blonde was crying tears, forming impossible spheres in zero gravity. The green one looked angry, but it was the anger of a frightened child, not the murderous rage of the warp-touched. Still appearances meant nothing when dealing with the ruinous powers. Innocence was the most insidious mask chaos could wear. Lance batteries, Ramiel said quietly. Target all 3. Fire on my command. Inquisitor, the Vox officer interrupted, one hand pressed to his earpiece. Ground forces report visual contact. The entities are descending toward landing zone 37. Astartes units request clarification on rules of engagement. The red-haired child. No, the entity that wore a child's shape had oriented herself somehow in the airless void. She reached out and took the hands of the other 2. Together they began to fall toward the planet below, drawn by gravity and something else, some inexplicable sense of direction that should have been impossible for creatures their apparent age. They fell through the atmosphere like 3 bright stars, burning trails of displaced air marking their descent. Ramiel's hand hovered over the firing authorization rune. He could end this now. 3 precise lance strikes the entities vaporized before they reached the surface. Another notation in his campaign log. But something made him hesitate. Not mercy, the Inquisition had no room for that weakness. Curiosity, perhaps. The need to understand the nature of this new threat. before destroying it. "Hold fire," he commanded. "All ground units, weapons free. Contain and observe, but do not engage unless directly threatened. I want to see what they do." The three entities struck the surface in the center of a battle-scarred plaza. Imperial forces had been here hours before, clearing out the last pocket of cultist resistance. Rubble still smoked from bolter impacts. The broken bodies of the enemy lay twisted among the ruins already beginning to rot in the thin atmosphere. It was into this graveyard that the children fell their impact, creating a crater 10 meters across, but somehow leaving them unharmed. Blossom pushed herself up first, small hands pressing against scorched ferrocrete. The world around her was nothing like Townsville. The sky hung gray and poisonous overhead, torn by distant fires. The buildings weren't buildings, they were bunkers, fortifications, structures designed for war rather than life. Everything smelled of smoke and metal, and something else, something that made her stomach hurt in ways she couldn't explain. "Where are we?" Bubbles whispered, clinging to Blossom's arm. Her voice shook. "I want to go home. I want Professor." "Don't know." Buttercup had already moved to the crater's edge, fists still raised, scanning the ruins with sharp instincts. "But I don't like it. Smells wrong. Feels wrong." Blossom tried to think, tried to organize her thoughts the way she always did when the professor gave them a difficult problem. But this wasn't a math equation or a spelling test. This was real and terrifying and completely beyond her understanding. One moment they'd been in Townsville chasing Mojo Jojo through downtown. The next, something had pulled at them, a sensation like being grabbed by invisible hands and thrown through a window that opened onto nowhere. Then falling through colors that hurt to see until they'd crashed here. "We stick together," Blossom said, trying to sound confident, trying to sound like a leader. "We find help, we figure out where we are, and we find a way home. Okay?" Bubbles nodded, still crying quietly. Buttercup grunted something that might have been agreement. They'd barely taken 3 steps when the kill squad appeared. A dozen soldiers in gray armor moved through the rubble with mechanical precision weapons raised. Their faces were hidden behind rebreather masks and targeting lenses. None of them looked human, not in any way that mattered. They moved like machines programmed for murder, and every barrel pointed directly at the 3 small figures standing in the crater. "Contact confirmed." One soldier reported into his Vox unit. 3 entities matching description. Awaiting orders." The response came back crisp with authority. "Purge protocols. New warp entities must be cleansed. The Emperor protects." The soldiers raised their weapons, boxy, brutal things that hummed with barely contained violence. Blossom threw her arms wide, trying to shield her sisters. Buttercup crouched ready to fight or flee. Bubbles just stood frozen, blue eyes wide with incomprehension. "Wait," Blossom called out. Her voice cracked. We don't want to hurt anyone. We're lost. We need help." The soldiers showed no reaction. Their fingers tightened on triggers. That was when the child appeared. A local. A girl no older than 8, dressed in rags that might once have been a uniform. She must have been hiding in the rubble overlooked during the initial sweep. Now she ran toward Bubbles' arms, outstretched, seeking protection, the way frightened children always sought protection from anything that looked strong and safe. She was crying, stumbling over broken stone, calling out in a language the 3 sisters couldn't understand. "Bubbles!" Blossom started to warn. The girl never made it. The bolter round caught her center mass reactive warhead, detonating inside her small chest. The explosion was clinical efficient. One moment, a running child. The next, a spray of red mist, and falling meat that hit the ground with wet sounds that would echo in 3 sets of memories forever. Time seemed to stop. Blossom stared at the smoking crater where the girl had been. Buttercup's fists unclenched slowly, her face gone white. Bubbles made a sound that wasn't quite a scream, her whole body starting to shake with something that went beyond simple fear or grief. The soldiers adjusted their aim, preparing to fire again. They showed no remorse, no hesitation. This was procedure. This was duty. In the Imperium of man, collateral damage was an accepted cost of maintaining security. One native child meant nothing compared to the potential threat of warp entities. But to 3 little girls from a world where heroes saved everyone, where right and wrong were painted in bright colors, and death was something that happened to villains after they'd been defeated and sent to jail, this was incomprehensible. This was wrong in ways their young minds had no framework to process. Chemical X, the impossible substance that had given them life and power, began to resonate. Deep in 3 small chests, 3 synthetic hearts started beating faster. The energy that made them more than human, more than anything that should exist, started to vibrate with frequencies that had nothing to do with physics and everything to do with emotion given form. Bubbles' eyes began to glow pale blue. Buttercup's fists ignited with crackling green light. Blossom's breath came out as visible frost the air around her, dropping 20 degrees in an instant. The soldiers fired. And for the first time in their short lives, the Powerpuff Girls learned what it meant to be truly, utterly afraid. Not of monsters or villains, or the consequences of staying up past bedtime, but of a world that would kill them for the crime of being different. A world that would murder a child seeking shelter and call it necessary. The bolter rounds screamed through the air toward 3 small targets. 3 impossible beings who had just witnessed the first death of their innocence. 3 children whose power was about to be measured against the grim darkness of the far future. And somewhere in the churning madness of the warp, something ancient and hungry turned its attention toward the bright, clean souls that had just entered its domain. 3 perfect vessels. 3 pure hearts waiting to be corrupted. The 41st millennium had no mercy to offer them. The bolter rounds never reached their targets. Buttercup moved first instinct, overriding thought. She blurred across the distance between herself and the nearest soldier, faster than human eyes could track, faster than targeting systems could adjust. Her small fist connected with the soldier's chest plate, and the armor didn't just dent it, exploded inward, ceramite and plasteel crumpling like paper. The soldier flew backward, his body ragdolling through 3 walls before coming to rest as a broken heap 50 meters away. The other soldiers tried to adjust to bring their weapons to bear on this impossible threat. They were trained, experienced veterans of 100 purges. But training meant nothing against something that moved like physics, was a suggestion rather than a law. Bubbles screamed. Not the scream of a frightened child, but something else entirely. The sound started low in her chest and built into a frequency that resonated with reality itself. Windows shattered, armor plates cracked. The soldiers closest to her dropped their weapons to clamp hands over bleeding ears, their rebreather masks doing nothing to protect them from a noise that bypassed physical protection and struck directly at the nervous system. A chimera transport rumbled around the corner, its turret swiveling to target the 3 small figures. The multi-laser charged with a rising whine. Bubbles turned toward it, tears still streaming down her face, and screamed again. The shock wave hit the tank like the fist of an angry god. Metal shrieked as the front armor buckled inward. The turret tore free of its mounting and spun away into the ruins. The Chimera flipped end over end before slamming into the ground upside down, fuel tanks rupturing in a bloom of orange flame. Blossom stood frozen for a heartbeat, watching her sisters unleash violence she'd never seen from them before. They'd fought villains in Townsville, sure, stopped robberies, defeated monsters, saved the city 100 times. But this was different. This was killing. These soldiers, whatever they were, weren't getting back up. They weren't going to jail. They were dying. The realization snapped her into motion. She drew in a sharp breath and exhaled frost crystallizing in the air before her. The temperature plummeted. Soldiers trying to flank from the left found their joints seizing as lubricants froze solid. Their weapons locked up barrels clogged with ice. One tried to trigger his grenade launcher, and the round detonated in the chamber flash-frozen explosives, proving unstable under extreme cold. "Fall back." The squad leader's voice cracked with panic. "Fall back, request immediate Astarte support, demon-level threat confirmed." More troops poured in from surrounding positions, not just infantry now, but heavier units. A squad of Astartes in Mark 7 power armor emerged from a burned-out basilica, their superhuman forms moving with terrifying purpose. Each stood 8 feet tall, genetically enhanced warriors bred for war. Their bolters were larger, more brutal than the standard infantry weapons. When they fired, the sound was like the tolling of funeral bells. Buttercup caught the first round mid-flight, her hand closing around the mass reactive shell before it could detonate. She crushed it like an insect, looked at the Space Marine who'd fired it, and grinned with manic fury. Then she was moving again, a green blur that left after-images burned into watching retinas. The first Astartes barely had time to register her approach before she was inside his guard. She didn't understand ceramite or adamantium, or the advanced metallurgy that made Space Marine armor near impervious to conventional weapons. She just knew he'd tried to hurt her sisters. Her punch went through his chest plate like it wasn't there, through the enhanced rib cage beneath and out his back in a spray of gore that painted the ruins behind him. The other Astartes opened fire as one, their discipline holding, despite the horror they'd just witnessed. Bolter rounds filled the air, creating a wall of explosive death. Blossom threw herself forward, arms spread wide, and exhaled again. The blast of Arctic air caught the incoming rounds, flash freezing them mid-flight. They dropped from the air like hail clattering harmlessly against the ground. "Together." Blossom called to her sisters, her voice high and frightened, but trying desperately to maintain control. "Stay together, don't—" A las cannon beam punched through the air where she'd been standing a moment before. Blossom dodged on pure instinct, the superheated energy close enough to singe her hair. She looked toward the source and saw a sentinel walker stalking through the rubble, its pilot already charging another shot. Bubbles wiped tears from her face with one small hand. Her eyes had gone from bright blue to something paler, colder. She looked at the sentinel, at its pilot visible through the canopy, and something inside her snapped. She flew straight up, faster than tracking systems could follow, then dropped like a meteor. Her fist struck the walker's cockpit dead center. The impact crater spread outward for 20 meters. The Sentinel ceased to exist as anything recognizable, compressed into a disc of mangled metal and pulped organic matter barely a meter across. Bubbles floated above the destruction, small fists still clenched, breathing hard. She'd never killed anything before. Not really. Not like this. "Please stop," she whispered, too quiet for anyone but her sisters to hear. "Please just stop." The Imperium did not stop. More units converged on their position. A Lehman Russ battle tank ground over rubble, its battle cannon swiveling to acquire targets. Infantry poured in from 6 different approach vectors, establishing overlapping fields of fire. Somewhere in the distance, air support was being scrambled. This was no longer a containment operation. This was extermination protocol. Buttercup landed next to her sisters, her dress splattered with blood that wasn't hers. Her hands shook not from fear, but from rage so pure it burned. What the hell is wrong with these people? That kid wasn't trying to hurt anyone. She was scared. I don't know. Blossom managed, her usual confidence shattered. I don't know what's happening. I don't know where we are. The Leman Russ fired. The battle cannon's roar drowned out all other sound. The shells screamed toward them, a projectile designed to punch through fortified bunkers. Buttercup met it head-on, flying straight into its path. The explosion, when she intercepted it mid-flight, lit up the plaza like a second sun. Smoke and flame obscured everything for 3 heartbeats. When it cleared, Buttercup hung in the air. Unharmed, the shell's payload dissipated against her body. She looked at the tank below with something beyond anger. Then she dove. The impact, when she struck the Leman Russ, flipped it onto its side. She punched through the armor plating again and again, each strike ringing out like hammer blows on an anvil. The crew tried to bail out, but there was nowhere to go. By the time Buttercup finished, the tank was a torn-open ruin, smoke pouring from its ruptured hull. The surviving Imperial forces began to break. Training and discipline could carry soldiers through conventional horrors, through the worst the galaxy had to offer. But this was beyond comprehension. 3 children, 3 small figures in bright dresses, were systematically destroying a reinforced Imperial position. Soldiers dropped their weapons and ran. Officers screamed for order, but panic was contagious. High above, aboard the Eternal Judgment Inquisitor, Ramiel watched through the main view screen. His knuckles had gone white where he gripped the command rail. Around him, the bridge crew stood in horrified silence. Magnitude of threat? Ramiel asked quietly. The tactical officer's voice shook as he responded. Inquisitor, our combat algorithms estimate individual combat capability equivalent to greater demon manifestation. Collectively, he trailed off, unable to finish. Collectively, off the scale, sir. Nothing in our threat database matches this profile. Ramiel's mind raced through options. Orbital bombardment would kill everything in a 10-kilometer radius, Imperial forces included. But if these entities were allowed to spread, to multiply, to corrupt... He reached for the firing authorization rune and hesitated. Something was wrong. Demons reveled in slaughter, fed on suffering, grew stronger with each soul consumed. These entities fought with rage and fear. Yes, but there was no corruption spreading from them. No warp taint bleeding into real space. They weren't trying to summon allies or open portals. They were just defending themselves. Badly. Clumsily. Like frightened children lashing out at a world trying to kill them. Cease fire, Ramiel ordered. All units fall back to secondary positions. Maintain observation, but do not engage. Inquisitor. The Master of Ordnance turned to him in shock. They've destroyed an entire Astarte squad. Casualties are... I know the casualties, Captain. Ramiel's voice cut like a blade. I also know heresy when I see it. And whatever those things are, they're not demons. Not yet. Down in the plaza, the 3 sisters huddled together among the ruins. Bodies lay scattered around them, broken armor and shattered weapons marking the perimeter of their desperate defense. Bubbles sobbed against Blossom's shoulder. Buttercup stood watch-fists, raised eyes scanning for the next threat. We didn't want this, Blossom whispered, trying to convince herself as much as anyone. We were just scared. They killed that girl. They tried to kill us. We had to what? Buttercup's voice was harsh. Had to murder a bunch of soldiers. Look at them. Blossom, look at what we did. They started it. Bubbles pulled back her face, red and tear-streaked. They killed that little girl. She just wanted help, and She couldn't finish, dissolving back into sobs. In the spaces between spaces, in the immaterial realm that pressed against reality like water against glass, things took notice. The warp churned with interest, drawn by the bright flames of three pure souls experiencing trauma for the first time. Lesser demons gathered at the threshold, not yet able to manifest, but able to whisper, to tempt, to corrupt. Poor little one. A voice like honey and poison drifted through Bubbles' grief. So much pain, so much fear. I can help. I can make it all go away. Bubbles' head snapped up, looking for the source of the voice. She saw nothing but ruins and smoke. Strong child. Another voice purred into Buttercup's rage. They hurt your family. They deserve worse than death. I can show you how to make them suffer. Buttercup shook her head, trying to clear it. The voice felt wrong, oily, somehow sliding through her thoughts, like something alive. Blossom sensed them too, these whispers at the edge of perception. Her analytical mind, still trying to process everything, latched onto this new phenomenon with desperate focus. Trying to understand. Trying to find a pattern. Trying to do anything except face the reality of what they'd just done. We need to leave, she said, forcing her voice steady. Right now. Before more come, before we... She couldn't say it. Before we kill more people. Before we become monsters. The three of them rose into the air, leaving the battlefield behind. They flew without direction, without destination, just away from the death and the horror and the growing certainty that this world didn't want them to exist. And in orbit, Inquisitor Ramiel watched them go. His hands still hovering over the orbital bombardment controls, weighing the cost of 3 small lives against the potential doom of an entire sector. The decision he made in the next few seconds would determine whether the 3 sisters saw another sunrise, or whether Asterion 9 would burn. They'd been flying for hours, or maybe minutes. Time had lost meaning in this alien sky. Blossom led them in aimless circles above the ruined cityscape, trying to think, trying to plan. But her thoughts kept circling back to the soldier she'd frozen, the way his joints had locked, the way he'd screamed before the cold stopped his lungs from working. She was supposed to be the smart one, the leader. Leaders were supposed to know what to do. She didn't know anything anymore. Bubbles hadn't stopped crying soft, hitching sobs that tore at Blossom's heart. Buttercup flew in tense silence, scanning the ruins below for threats that might not come but probably would. They'd all seen the way that world worked now, violence followed by more violence in an endless cycle that had no room for mercy or understanding. The light came without warning. One moment they were alone in the poisoned sky. The next, brilliance erupted from the clouds above them, so bright it turned the gray atmosphere white gold. The 3 sisters shielded their eyes, hovering in place, as something descended through the radiance. Wing. Great sweeping pinions of pure white energy that left trails of luminescence in their wake. A figure clad in armor that gleamed like captured sunlight. Every plate and joint worked with craftsmanship that transcended mere metalwork. A woman no more than a woman descended toward them with grace that made flight look like the most natural thing in existence. In her hands she held a burning sword, flames wreathing the blade without consuming it. Blossom's analytical mind cataloged details even through her shock. The armor was ornate but functional, designed for combat rather than ceremony. The sword radiated heat she could feel from 20 meters away. But most striking were the eyes, warm amber, that held depths of experience no human should possess. Eyes that had seen civilizations rise and fall, that had witnessed horrors beyond counting, yet still maintained something Blossom couldn't quite name. Compassion, perhaps, or its last dying ember. Saint Celestine, living saint of the Adepta Sororitas, regarded the three small figures with an expression that cycled through surprise, confusion, and finally settled on cautious concern. She'd been drawn here by reports of a major warp incursion, had expected to find the usual manifestations of chaos reality, bleeding demons, spilling through tears in space, the screaming and the corruption and the endless war against darkness. Instead, she found three children in bright dresses, hovering in midair, radiating power that made her blessed senses sing with warning, yet carried not a trace of the warp's taint. "What are you?" she asked, her voice carrying the weight of divine authority, yet somehow gentle. Not an accusation, a genuine question. The three sisters looked at each other. Blossom floated forward slightly, trying to position herself between Celestine and her sisters, even though she had no idea if this being was friend or foe. Probably foe. Everything in this world seemed to be foe. "We're the Powerpuff Girls," Blossom said, hating how small her voice sounded. "I'm Blossom. That's Bubbles and Buttercup. We're from Townsville. We just want to go home." Celestine studied them with eyes that had witnessed 10,000 years of war. She'd fought demons that wore innocent faces, had cut down children corrupted into weapons by chaos cults, had learned through bitter experience that mercy was a luxury the Imperium could rarely afford. But these three... She reached out with her blessed senses, the psychic gift granted by the Emperor's light, and found no corruption, no taint, no shadow of the ruinous powers clinging to their souls. Instead, she found something that shouldn't exist in the 41st millennium. Purity. Not the purity of faith or doctrine or ideological conviction, but genuine innocence hearts that had never known true cruelty, minds that still believed in heroes and happy endings, and justice that didn't require mountains of corpses to achieve. It was like looking at a relic from an age before the fall, before humanity learned that darkness was the only reasonable response to a universe of horror. "Where is Townsville?" Celestine asked carefully. "We don't know." Bubbles wiped tears from her face with the back of one small hand. "We were fighting Mojo Jojo, and then something pulled us, and we fell through colors and landed here, and people started shooting at us. And there was a little girl, and she just wanted help, and they killed her, and..." "Breathe, child." Celestine's voice carried command born of centuries leading armies. But underneath ran genuine concern. "You are not of this world. That much is clear. The energies you emanate are unlike anything in Imperial records. You are not demons, not Xenos, not any classification of threat I have encountered. Yet you have killed Imperial soldiers." "They tried to kill us first," Buttercup snapped, anger flaring hot in her chest. "What were we supposed to do? Just let them turn us into paste? In the Imperium, that which is unknown is treated as hostile until proven otherwise." Celestine spoke without judgment, simply stating fact. "You emerged from a warp tear. You demonstrate powers that defy natural law." From their perspective, the soldiers acted correctly. "Correctly?" Blossom's voice cracked. "They murdered a child. One child against potential sector-wide contamination." Celestine saw the horror bloom on three young faces and continued more gently. I do not say this is right. I say this is the reality of the Imperium of man. We exist in a galaxy of horrors, surrounded by threats that would see humanity extinct. The Inquisition's mandate is to preserve our species at any cost. Individual lives, even innocent ones, are considered acceptable losses if it prevents greater catastrophe. That's insane, Buttercup said flatly. Yes. Celestine's wings dimmed slightly as if weighted by exhausted agreement. It is. But it is also the only way humanity has survived 40,000 years of unending war. High above, Inquisitor Ramiel watched through augmented viewing equipment, his jaw tightening as he observed the living saint conversing with the entity, as rather than destroying them. He opened a Vox channel, his voice crackling through with mechanical distortion. Saint Celestine, you are ordered to neutralize the hostile entities immediately. They have demonstrated demon-level threat capacity. Protocol demands nothing of me, Inquisitor. Celestine's response came sharp and clear. These children are not demons. There is no taint on them. No corruption. They are frightened and lost, not hostile. Saint, you are being deceived. Ramiel's voice took on a harsh edge. The ruinous powers are masters of deception. What you perceive as innocence may be the most insidious corruption. Stand aside or be declared in violation of your sacred duty. Celestine's grip tightened on her blade. She'd spent centuries defending the Imperium, had sacrificed herself countless times in service to humanity's survival. But she'd also witnessed the Inquisition's methods, had seen them burn worlds to prevent theoretical corruption, had watched them execute billions on suspicion alone. The three beings before her showed no signs of taint. More than that, they radiated something the grim dark millennium had nearly forgotten existed. Hope. Pure, untainted, genuine hope that better things were possible. I will not harm children, Celestine said quietly into the Vox. Not without evidence of actual corruption. Then you leave me no choice. Ramiel's voice went flat dead. Carcharodon's Astra, you are weapons free. Target the entities and the living saint. Purge them all. The sky tore open with thunder. Drop pods screamed through the atmosphere, their retro thrusters firing at the last possible second before impact. 10 armored giants emerged from clouds of pulverized stone, their power armor bearing the gray and white color scheme of the Carcharodon's chapter. Shark Marines they were called, in whispered rumors. Space Marines who operated on the furthest fringes of Imperial space, who answered to almost no authority save the Inquisition, who were known for brutal efficiency and complete disregard for anything resembling mercy. Their chapter master. A towering figure whose armor was adorned with trophy chains of alien bones raised one massive gauntlet. His voice boomed through external Vox casters, emotionless as a ship's machine spirit, announcing boarding action. Saint Celestine, you are relieved of command. The Emperor's Inquisition has declared these entities and yourself to be threats to mankind's survival. Comply or be purged. Celestine moved to position herself between the Carcharodons and the three children, her wings spreading wide, sword raised. I will not allow the execution of innocent children based on paranoia and fear. Then you are heretic. The chapter master's bolter came up in one smooth motion. And heretics burn. The Carcharodons opened fire as 110 bolters speaking in perfect synchronization. Mass reactive shells screamed through the air each round, capable of punching through ceramite and detonating inside flesh. Celestine's blade moved in arcs of liquid gold, batting away incoming fire with impossible precision. But she couldn't deflect everything. A round clipped her left wing, detonating in a spray of golden light and causing her to dip in the air. "Fly," she commanded the three sisters, not taking her eyes off the approaching space marines. "Fly away from here, I will hold them." But Bubbles was already moving, driven by instinct rather than thought. The woman with wings had been kind to them, had tried to understand, had put herself between them and danger. That made her good. That made her someone worth protecting. Bubbles flew straight at the chapter master, her small form accelerating to speeds that left sonic booms in her wake. She hit him like a missile. The chapter master, a veteran of 2 centuries of warfare, a warrior who'd fought in the depths of space hulks against Jenny stealers and faced down orc war bosses in single combat, was completely unprepared for impact from something that massed less than 30 kilograms, but moved with kinetic energy, approaching that of an orbital strike. He flew backward, his power armor screaming alerts about structural compromise, and crashed through the remains of a hab block. The other Carcharodons adjusted instantly, training and modification and allowing them to process the impossible with machine-like efficiency. 4 turned their weapons on Bubbles. 3 maintained fire on Celestine. The remaining 3 opened up on Blossom and Buttercup. Buttercup met them head-on, weaving through the storm of bolter fire with movements that treated ballistics as obstacles rather than threats. She reached the nearest space marine and drove her fist into his midsection with enough force to fold his power armor inward. He went down hard, systems failing, internal organs ruptured despite his enhanced physiology. Blossom hung back, trying to think tactically, even as terror threatened to overwhelm her. These warriors were faster than the regular soldiers, stronger, better armed. And there were too many. Even if they could win, and that was far from certain, they'd have to kill. Again. More death added to the tally that already kept her awake at night, in those brief moments when exhaustion forced her eyes closed. She saw Celestine falter a bolter round, catching her in the shoulder, spinning her in midair. The saint recovered, but golden radiant blood sprayed from the wound. She was hurt. Actually hurt. And still she fought, still she placed herself between the 3 sisters and the Emperor's wrath. "Stop!" Blossom screamed, ice breath forming in front of her. "Please, just stop. We don't want to fight." The Carcharodons answered with renewed fire. A heavy bolter opened up from one of the drop pods, its larger rounds designed to shred light vehicles. The stream of explosive death tracked toward Bubbles, who was still recovering from her collision with the chapter master. Celestine saw the danger, saw the shells arcing toward the small blonde child who'd tried to defend her. Without hesitation, she dove wings, folding for maximum speed, putting herself between Bubbles and death. 3 heavy bolter rounds struck her center mass. Armor that had withstood demon claws and heretic fire crumpled under the impacts. The shells detonated inside her chest cavity, shredding superhuman organs and blessed flesh alike. Her wings flickered golden light, dimming to embers. Saint Celestine, living hint of the Adepta Sororitas, fell from the sky like a broken bird. No. Bubbles' scream wasn't sonic this time. It was just pain, pure and terrible. She caught Celestine before the saint hit the ground, small arms cradling the dying woman's head. Celestine looked up at the child, holding her blood the color of starlight running from her lips. She tried to speak, to offer comfort or warning, but the wounds were too severe. Her eyes met Bubbles' tear-filled gaze, and in that moment, she saw past the power and the impossible abilities to the frightened child beneath. A child who'd just watched someone die trying to protect her. "Run!" Celestine managed to whisper each word, costing her. "The Emperor protects." Her eyes closed. The golden light faded completely. In Bubbles' arms, Saint Celestine lay still and broken, a martyr to mercy, in a galaxy that had no patience for such weakness. Something deep in 3 small chests began to resonate. Chemical X responding to grief and rage and horror. Compounded past bearings started to vibrate at frequencies that had nothing to do with physics. The air around the 3 sisters began to shimmer and twist, reality itself protesting against the impossible energies building within them. Buttercup's eyes went completely green, glowing like reactor cores. Bubbles' sobs took on harmonics that made nearby rubble levitate. Blossom's breath came out in crystalline fractals that spread across the ground in geometric patterns no natural ice ever formed. The Carcharodon's veterans of impossible wars felt something they rarely experienced: fear. And in the warp pressing against reality's skin, something vast and terrible and eternally hungry turned the full weight of its attention toward 3 bright souls balanced on the edge of breaking. The moment stretched like melting glass, reality bending around 3 small figures, cradling a fallen saint. The Carcharodons held their fire not from mercy, but from tactical assessment. Their targeting systems were registering energy spikes that defied conventional measurement patterns that suggested imminent, catastrophic release. Warriors who'd survived by trusting their instincts knew when to press an attack and when to withdraw and reassess. Bubbles looked down at Celestine's still face, at the golden blood staining her small hands, and something fundamental broke inside her. The woman with wings had been kind, had tried to help, had died protecting her. In Townsville, the good guys always won. The heroes saved everyone. Death was something that happened off-screen, something reversible, something that didn't leave you holding a cooling body while your hands shook and your mind screamed that this wasn't supposed to happen. "Wake up," Bubbles whispered, her voice small and lost. "Please wake up, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry, please don't be dead. Please." But Celestine didn't move, didn't breathe. The light that had suffused her form had faded to nothing, leaving only broken flesh and shattered armor. That was when Bubbles heard the voice. Poor little one. It came from everywhere and nowhere, sweet as poisoned honey, soft as a mother's lullaby. Such pain, such beautiful, exquisite pain. You don't deserve this suffering. Bubbles' head snapped up, looking for the source. She saw only ruins and smoke and the gray warriors watching from a distance. But the voice continued sliding through her thoughts like oil through water. You could make it better. You have such power, child. Power to reshape reality itself. Why should anyone suffer when you could make them all happy? Make them smile. Make them laugh. Forever and ever and ever. Just one little choice. One tiny decision to share your gift with the world.
Bounty driver or Sambusari.
In the Imperium, a blue horror pressed against the veil between dimensions, drawn by grief so pure, it blazed like a beacon. The thing that had once been part of a pink horror, split by Tsinch's capricious will into its component emotions, sensed an opportunity. This child's sorrow could birth such wonderful chaos if properly cultivated. Such delicious despair transmuted into terrible joy. Bubbles felt something moving at the edge of her vision, a flash of blue that vanished when she tried to focus on it. The voice kept whispering, kept promising, kept offering solutions that would make the pain stop. All she had to do was listen. All she had to do was accept help. Bubbles! Blossom's voice cut through the whispers like a knife. Bubbles, what's wrong? You're glowing. Buttercup stood between her sisters and the Carcharodons, fists raised, every muscle tensed. But her attention kept fragmenting, pulled by sounds that shouldn't exist. Laughter, harsh, mocking laughter echoing from the ruins, and under it, another voice, deeper, more insidious. Child of war. It rumbled through her consciousness. Born for battle, bred for violence. Why do you resist your nature? She spun, looking for the speaker, found nothing but shadows that seemed to move with purpose, coalescing into almost shapes before dispersing again. They hurt your family. The golden one who tried to help, they killed her in front of you. Doesn't that make you angry? Doesn't that make you want to make them pay? Not just defeat them, not just stop them, make them suffer. Shut up, Buttercup growled, but her voice lacked conviction, because the voice was right. She was angry, angrier than she'd ever been. The soldiers who'd killed that little girl, the warriors who'd shot down Celestine, this entire horrible world that seemed built on cruelty and suffering. She wanted to hurt them all, wanted to make them feel what they'd made her sisters feel. Yes. The voice purred with satisfaction. That's it. That rage, that fury. I can help you channel it. Help you become what you were meant to be. A weapon. A force of pure destruction. No more holding back. No more mercy for those who deserve none. Buttercup's fists ignited with green fire. But this time the flames burned darker, tinged with something that wasn't quite Chemical X anymore. Shadows writhed within the emerald glow. In the spaces between spaces, cultists of Zinch, who'd been watching the battle through scrying pools, began their chants, trying to widen the cracks in three young psyches. They'd seen empires fall to whispers. They'd witnessed saints corrupted by doubt. 3 children, no matter how powerful, would surely succumb if the proper pressure was applied at the correct angles. Blossom saw her sisters changing, saw the wrongness creeping into their power, and terror crystallized in her chest. This was corruption. Real corruption, not the theoretical threat the Inquisitor had ranted about, but actual malevolent influence seeping into Bubbles and Buttercup like poison into wounds. She had to do something. Had to protect them. But what? How? She was just a kid. A smart kid, sure, but still just a kid, and this world was so far beyond her understanding, she couldn't even see the edges of her ignorance. Bubbles, Buttercup, listen to me. Blossom flew to them, grabbing their shoulders. The contact sent electricity arcing between the 3 of them. Chemical X resonating with Chemical X. Whatever you're hearing, it's not real. It's some kind of trick. You don't understand. Bubbles said, her voice distant, dreamy. I could fix it. Fix everything. Make everyone happy. Wouldn't that be good? Wouldn't that be what heroes do? Heroes don't exist here, Buttercup said flatly. Her eyes had gone completely dark, no white remaining, just endless emerald depths. Only killers and victims, and I'm tired of being a victim. No, Blossom's voice cracked with desperation. That's not, we're not. But what could she say? That they were heroes. They'd killed dozens of soldiers. That they were good. They'd destroyed tanks and crushed men inside their armor. That they didn't belong here. That was the only true thing, and it offered no comfort at all. The Carcharodons chose that moment to advance. Whatever was happening to the entities it represented, either an opportunity to strike while they were distracted, or a threat that needed to be neutralized before it reached critical mass. Either way, their duty was clear. Bolter fire erupted across the plaza. Mass reactive rounds screamed toward the three sisters with mechanical precision. Blossom moved on instinct, exhaling a wall of crystalline ice between them and the incoming death. The rounds detonated against the barrier's spiderweb cracks, spreading but not breaking through. "They're attacking again," Buttercup said with grim satisfaction. "Good. Let them come. Let them all come. I'll show them what happens when you hurt my family." She moved to charge, to crash through the ice wall and tear into the Space Marines with lethal intent. But Blossom grabbed her arm, held on with strength, born of desperation rather than power. "Don't, Buttercup, please. If you do this, if you give in to that anger, you'll become what they think we are. You'll prove them right." Maybe they are right. Buttercup tried to pull free, but Blossom wouldn't let go. Maybe we are monsters. Look at what we've done. Look at the bodies. We're not heroes, Blossom. We're killers. At least if I'm going to kill, I should kill the ones who deserve it. No one deserves it. Blossom was crying now, tears freezing on her cheeks. No one deserves any of this. Not them, not us, not that little girl, not Celestine. This whole world is wrong, and we can't fix it by adding more death. The ice wall shattered under sustained fire. The Carcharodons advanced in perfect formation. Weapons raised each Space Marine a killing machine refined over centuries of genetic modification and training. Behind them, the chapter master had recovered from Bubbles' impact, his armor sparking, but functional, his eyes visible through his helmet's lenses, cold and absolutely certain of his purpose. "Let me help you," the voice whispered to Bubbles. "Just accept my gift. Just say yes. You'll never feel pain again. None of you will. Eternal happiness. Isn't that what heroes want? To save everyone?" Bubbles looked at Celestine's body still cradled in her arms, looked at her sisters, one consumed by rage, the other trying desperately to hold them together. Looked at the advancing warriors who would kill them without hesitation or remorse, because that's what this galaxy demanded. Her mouth opened. The word yes formed on her lips. And then she saw it. Just for a moment. A flicker at the edge of her vision. Something blue and cackling and hungry. Something that wanted to crawl inside her head and make her into something else. Something that would use her power not to help, but to hurt in ways that pretended to be kindness. "No," Bubbles whispered. Then louder with growing conviction, "No, you're lying. You don't want to help. You want to use me." The whispers turned sharp, angry. "Foolish child, you could have had everything you could have." "I said no." Bubbles' scream carried harmonics that shattered windows 3 blocks away. The blue horror trying to manifest found itself thrust back, unable to maintain its grip on real space against such forceful rejection. But the damage was done. The attempted corruption, the emotional trauma compounded on trauma, the sheer impossibility of 3 children trying to process horrors that broke adult minds, it all converged into a single point. 3 hearts beating in synchronization. 3 sets of lungs drawing breath as one. 3 minds connected by bond of sisterhood and shared power, reaching a critical threshold. Chemical X resonated. Not the gentle hum it normally maintained, but a harmonic that built and built and built, climbing toward frequencies that physics had no equations for. Energy poured from 3 small bodies visible as distortions in space itself. Reality bending around them, like light around a black hole. The Carcharodons stopped advancing. Their targeting systems went haywire, unable to lock onto readings that kept changing, that kept defying every parameter in their threat assessment protocols. Buttercup felt it building in her chest power, responding to emotion, responding to power in a feedback loop that had no off switch. The anger was still there, but now it was just fuel for something much larger. Something that didn't care about revenge or justice or anything except release. Blossom tried to contain it, tried to pull the energy back, but it was like trying to hold back a tidal wave with her hands. Her analytical mind cataloged what was happening even as she failed to stop it cascading. Resonance exponential energy, increase threshold breach imminent. "Run!" Blossom managed to gasp to the Carcharodons, to anyone who could hear. "Run! We can't stop it! Run!" But it was too late. The energy reached critical mass. 3 small chests blazed with light that shouldn't exist. Chemical impossibility given form and voice, and terrible, unstoppable momentum. And in one synchronous moment of release, 3 children who just wanted to go home unleashed forces that would reshape the Asterian system. The shockwave began as light, then sound, then something beyond either. It radiated outward from the 3 sisters in an expanding sphere of altered physics, washing over space marines and ruins and the dead saint's body with equal indifference. Where it passed, reality twisted. Gravity fluctuated. Time stuttered. Colors bled into spectrums human eyes weren't equipped to perceive. The Carcharodons caught in the initial wave found their armor systems failing. Not damaged, just confused, as if the fundamental constants the machine spirits relied upon had stopped being constant. They tried to maintain formation, but couldn't coordinate when each warrior's chronometer showed a different time. When gravity pulled at inconsistent angles, when their own enhanced perception couldn't agree on which direction was up. The wave kept expanding, faster, stronger. A pocket dimension of impossible physics spreading across the battlefield, the city, the continent, the world. And at the center of it all, 3 small figures hung in midair, unconscious power pouring from them, in torrents they had no capacity to control or comprehend. In orbit, Inquisitor Ramiel watched his sensors go mad, watched readings climb past maximum tolerances and keep climbing, watched a localized reality tear spread across his view screen like a wound in space itself. His hand moved toward the Exterminatus authorization, hovering over the rune that would condemn the entire world to cleansing fire. But even that might not be enough. Whatever was happening down there had moved beyond simple threat assessment. This was something new. Something that might require the attention of forces far beyond a single Inquisitor's authority, if anyone survived to report it. The wave hit the outer defensive perimeter like the hand of an uncaring god. Fortifications that had withstood siege warfare for decades buckled and warped their foundations, twisting into geometries that shouldn't support weight, but somehow did. A warlord titan, its princeps screaming warnings into dead vox channels, found its adamantium frame bending like heated wax joints, flexing in directions the engineers had never intended. The machine spirit howled in binary confusion as its reactor tried to compensate for gravity that now pulled in 3 different directions simultaneously. Demons that had been circling the system's edge, drawn by the promise of fresh souls, found themselves torn apart, not by holy fire or blessed weapons, but by simple physics reasserting itself in their vicinity with prejudice. A bloodletter attempting to manifest discovered that the laws governing corporeal existence no longer agreed on what solid matter meant. It dissolved mid-scream essence scattered across dimensions it had no framework to comprehend. The Carcharodons, caught in the expanding sphere of warped reality, experienced time as a suggestion rather than a constant. One moment they were advancing on the three entities. The next, or perhaps the previous, or perhaps simultaneously, they were stumbling backward, their enhanced perception struggling to process input that contradicted itself frame by frame. One space marine raised his bolter to fire, pulled the trigger, and watched the round exit the barrel hang in midair for 3 subjective seconds, then accelerate backward into the chamber, before deciding to continue forward after all, at twice its normal velocity. "Fall back," the chapter master's voice crackled through Vox channels that were receiving his words before he spoke them. "All units withdraw to." But there was no to anymore. Direction had become negotiable. Up was sometimes sideways. Forward led to yesterday. The ground beneath their boots rippled like liquid stone, frozen waves of ferrocrete that supported their weight while defying every principle of material science. In orbit, Ramiel watched his entire fleet's sensor arrays fail one after another. Not damaged. Confused. Every ship's machine spirit was receiving data that made no sense, that contradicted other data streams, that suggested the planet below existed in multiple quantum states at once. His astropaths had collapsed, bleeding from eyes and ears, overwhelmed by psychic resonance that had no signature, no source, no malice, just impossible purity, screaming through the warp like a klaxon made of light. "Inquisitor." His master of fleet's voice held barely controlled panic. "The entity's energy signature is still climbing. Current readings suggest, sir, they're approaching stellar scale output. If this continues..." "I know." Ramiel's fingers whitened on the command throne's armrests. "Prepare exterminatus protocol. Full cyclonic bombardment. We may need to crack the planet's crust to contain this." "Sir, that will kill everything within the system. All Imperial forces, all civilians, everything." Better one system than a whole sector. But even as he said it, Ramiel doubted whether conventional weapons would be enough. What he was witnessing went beyond simple energy release. This was reality itself being rewritten by 3 unconscious children whose power had no ceiling because it had never needed one. At the epicenter, suspended in a sphere of distorted space, Blossom Bubbles and Buttercup hung limp and unaware. Energy poured from them in cascades, and Chemical X responding to unconscious trauma the way a star responds to fusion, inevitably, unstoppably, converting emotional weight into physical force. Around them, reality rippled outward in concentric circles, each wave carrying alterations that spread like cracks in glass. A battalion of Imperial Guard Biosona had found their laser guns spontaneously converting to different states of matter. Solid one moment liquid, the next gaseous, the third before cycling through again without regard for the soldiers trying to wield them. An artillery battery's shells detonated in reverse, sucking shrapnel back into the barrels and unsealing themselves. A Medicae station experienced time dilation that left its staff watching patients' wounds heal and reopen in stuttering loops. The entire Asterion system held its breath, waiting for the moment when the wave would reach critical mass and simply erase everything within its boundary. And then, impossibly light. Not the harsh white of the expanding distortion, but warm gold that cut through the chaos like a blade through water. At the center of the plaza, where Celestine's body had lain, broken and cold radiance erupted from the corpse. The saint's wounds sealed themselves, flesh knitting closed with divine certainty, her eyes opened, glowing with borrowed power from a force that had been watching, waiting, judging whether this moment warranted intervention. The Emperor protects. The phrase wasn't just dogma. Sometimes, rarely, when the stakes demanded and the need was pure, it was literal truth. Celestine rose on wings that burned brighter than before, her armor whole again, her blade already in hand. She looked at the expanding pocket dimension, at the three small figures at its heart, and understood immediately what she was witnessing. Not chaos, not corruption, just children whose power had no restraints encountering trauma. Their minds couldn't process their abilities, responding the only way they knew how, by trying to reshape the world into something less terrible. Children. Her voice cut through the distortion, carrying harmonics that resonated with something deeper than sound. You must wake. Your power is tearing reality apart. The three sisters didn't respond. Couldn't respond. They were too deep in unconsciousness, too lost in the feedback loop of energy and emotion. Celestine flew into the heart of the distortion, her blessed nature, allowing her to navigate physics that would have shredded lesser beings. She reached Blossom first, placing one gauntleted hand on the girl's shoulder. The contact created a harmonic that ran through all three sisters, a grounding note in the chaos of their resonance. Blossom's eyes fluttered open, unfocused, struggling to process consciousness. She saw golden wings, felt warmth that pushed back against the cold terror that had been consuming her. You're alive. Death is complicated for those who serve him most devotedly, Celestine said gently. But that's not important now. Child, listen to me carefully. Your energy is fighting with the fundamental structure of this reality. It rejects your existence, and you reject its cruelty, and the conflict is destroying everything. You cannot remain here. Bubbles stirred. Then Buttercup, both waking to find themselves suspended in a nightmare of their own making. Around them, they could see the destruction spreading, soldiers caught in temporal loops, buildings existing in multiple states at once, the very fabric of space bending under the weight of their unconscious rejection of this galaxy's darkness. We didn't mean to, Bubbles whispered, fresh tears streaming. We just wanted it to stop. Wanted to go home. I know. Celestine's voice held infinite compassion wrapped in urgent necessity. But good intentions matter little when the sector stands on the edge of catastrophic failure. You must leave. Now. Before the Inquisition decides that orbital bombardment is the only solution. We don't know how. Blossom's analytical mind grasped desperately for solutions, but found nothing. We don't know how we got here. We can't just... And then she remembered. When they'd first fallen through the warp breach, tumbling through impossible colors, something had broken off. A fragment. She'd felt it even then, a piece of Chemical X that had torn free during their transit, left behind in the crater where they'd landed. The fragment, Blossom said urgently. When we arrived, something broke off from whatever makes us us. I felt it. It's still here. Celestine understood immediately. A beacon. Something still connected to your origin point. She looked at Bubbles and Buttercup. Can you sense it? The two sisters closed their eyes, reaching out with senses they didn't fully understand. Chemical X, recognizing Chemical X across distance and dimension. And yes, there, faint but present, a tiny shard of home energy buried in rubble 1/2 kilometer away. I feel it, Buttercup said, some of her usual confidence returning. It's like a piece of us we left behind. Then that is your way home. Celestine began flying them toward the source, moving through the distorted space with purpose. You will use it as an anchor point. Open a pathway back to wherever you came from. Your presence here is anathema to this reality. Use that rejection. let it push you out. They landed in the crater, and Blossom began digging through rubble with hands that moved stone like cardboard. 30 seconds of frantic search, and she found it a crystal the size of her thumb, pulsing with familiar pink light. Chemical X in its pure form, still resonating with the energy signature of Townsville of Professor Utonium's lab of home. The moment she touched it, the fragment began to glow brighter. Around them, the pocket dimension's expansion slowed, then stopped. The energy was finding focus, channeling toward a single point, rather than radiating in all directions. Bubbles Mats, Blossom, said her leader's instinct taking over despite her fear. I need you to stabilize the frequency. Keep it from fluctuating. Buttercup, you're the strongest. You're going to have to force the door open. This reality doesn't want a portal to somewhere it can't reach. You'll have to make it comply. For once, neither sister argued. Bubbles placed her hands near the crystal, her empathic nature syncing with its resonance, smoothing out the chaotic spikes into something approaching a stable waveform. Buttercup stood ready, fists clenched, preparing to punch through dimensional barriers, the way she'd punched through tank armor. The air began to tear. Not like the warp breach they'd fallen through, no corruption, no screaming, no wrongness. Just a clean cut in space edges glowing with the bright colors of home. Through the growing gap, they could see Townsville. Their Townsville. Sunshine and blue sky and buildings that weren't fortified bunkers. A world where children could be children. Now, Blossom called. Buttercup drove her fist into the tear, and reality surrendered with a sound like shattering crystal. The portal yawned wide, a doorway between universes held open by sheer stubborn refusal to accept that some barriers couldn't be broken. The three sisters stood at the threshold, looking back at the world that had tried so hard to kill them. At the ruins, and the soldiers, and the sky full of warships preparing to burn everything to ash. And at Celestine standing between them and the Imperium one final time. Thank you, Blossom said quietly, for trying to protect us. For being kind. Celestine knelt, bringing herself to eye level with the three small figures. She reached out, placed a hand on Blossom's head, in a gesture that was part blessing, part farewell. Return to your world, children. Hold tight to your innocence. Never let the darkness convince you that cruelty is strength or that mercy is weakness. The galaxy needs lights like yours, but... She paused, looking at the devastation around them. But some places will extinguish those lights rather than be illuminated by them. Will you be okay? Bubbles asked, still crying. They'll blame you for helping us. I have been blamed for far worse in his service. Celestine smiled, sad and ancient, and somehow still hopeful. The Emperor protects child, even when his servants don't understand his will. Now go, before they decide my resurrection is insufficient reason to stay the bombardment. Buttercup looked at the living saint, at the woman who died for them once already, and made a decision. She stepped forward and hugged Celestine fiercely, ignoring armor and wings and divine radiance. Just a child hugging someone who'd shown them kindness in a world of horror. Thank you for not being like the others, Buttercup whispered. Thank you for being good. Celestine returned the embrace carefully, mindful of her strength versus the small body in her arms. You three are the good ones. Never forget that. No matter what the darkness tries to tell you. The portal was beginning to destabilize. Chemical X wanted to return home, and it was pulling at the three sisters with increasing insistence. Blossom took Bubbles' hand, then Buttercup's. Together, the way they'd always been, the way they'd always need to be. Goodbye, all three said as one. And then they stepped through, leaving behind the grim darkness of the far future for the bright certainty of home. The portal collapsed the moment they passed through reality, snapping back like overstretched rubber. The pocket dimension began to collapse in on itself, the impossible physics unwinding as their source vanished. Within seconds, the Asterian system returned to normal, or what passed for normal in the 41st millennium. Celestine stood alone in the ruins, her wings folding, her sword dimming. Around her, Imperial forces began to regroup to assess damage to process what they'd just witnessed. High above, Inquisitor Ramiel stared at the readouts, showing normal space where infinite impossibility had been moments before. His hand moved away from the exterminatus controls, slowly, reluctantly. "Mark this system for quarantine," he said quietly. "No one speaks of what happened here. No records, no reports. As far as the Imperium is concerned, Asterion 9 experienced a minor warp incursion that was successfully contained." "And the entities, sir?" Ramiel was silent for a long moment. "Gone. Back to wherever they came from. And we should thank the Emperor they chose to leave rather than stay." He turned from the viewport. "Seal all data regarding this incident under Vermilion-level encryption. If word spreads of what 3 children did to an entire system..." He didn't finish. Didn't need to. If the Inquisition learned that such power could exist uncontrolled, they'd scour every world looking for similar anomalies. The purges would be endless. Better to pretend it never happened. In the ruins below, Celestine picked up the tiny fragment of Chemical X that the sisters had left behind. It no longer glowed, no longer pulsed with energy. Just a simple crystal, inert and powerless, all its connection to home severed. She closed her gauntlet around it, feeling its edges press into her palm. "Go with the Emperor's blessing," she whispered to 3 children who were already home and would never hear. "And never return to this darkness." The crystal crumbled to dust, and with it the last physical evidence that 3 impossible beings had ever touched the Warhammer galaxy. Some doors once closed should remain that way forever. They fell through this portal and landed hard on familiar tile, the impact jarring, but not painful. Chemical X absorbed the kinetic energy the way it always had, protecting them from harm even when they were too exhausted to consciously control their powers. For a long moment, the 3 sisters just lay there, on the cool laboratory floor, breathing air that smelled like cleaning solution and coffee instead of smoke and blood. Home. They were home. Blossom pushed herself up, first muscle memory taking over where conscious thought had fled. The lab looked exactly as they'd left it. Beakers on benches, equations covering whiteboards, the familiar hum of equipment running through diagnostic cycles. Afternoon sunlight streamed through windows that weren't barred or reinforced, just plain glass, looking out on a city where people walked on sidewalks instead of cowering in bunkers. "Girls!" Professor Utonium's voice cracked with desperate hope. He'd been standing by the main workstation coffee mug, frozen halfway to his lips, staring at the empty air where, moments before, an impossible tear in reality had vomited his daughters back into existence. The mug hit the floor, ceramic shattering brown liquid spreading across white tile as he ran to them. "Where have you been?" His hands shook as he grabbed Blossom's shoulders, then pulled all 3 girls into a crushing embrace. 3 days. 3 days you've been gone. No trace, no signal. The hotline couldn't find you. I thought he couldn't finish. Just held them, this man who'd accidentally created 3 perfect beings with unlimited power, sobbing with relief against Bubbles' hair while she wrapped her small arms around his neck and cried into his lab coat. "We're sorry," Bubbles managed between hitching sobs. "We're so sorry, Professor. We didn't mean to leave. We didn't know how to get back." There was this pull and colors. And then we were somewhere else, and people were shooting at us, and slow down. The professor pulled back slightly, examining each girl in turn with eyes that had spent 3 days imagining every horror that could befall them. They looked physically fine, no injuries, no obvious trauma. But their eyes, God, their eyes looked decades older than they had 72 hours ago. Start from the beginning. What happened? So they told him. Taking turns interrupting each other, the story spilling out in fragments that the professor had to piece together, like assembling a shattered vase. They told him about the warp breach and the soldiers who'd opened fire without warning, about the little girl running toward bubbles, seeking shelter, and the bolter round that had erased her from existence, about the fighting that followed the deaths they'd caused in desperate self-defense. Blossom's voice went very small when she described freezing soldiers until their joints locked until they couldn't breathe. Buttercup stared at her hands while recounting how her fist had gone through power armor, like it wasn't there through enhanced flesh and bone beneath. Bubbles couldn't stop crying as she talked about the voices in the darkness, promising to make everyone happy if she'd just say yes. And then Celestine, the living saint with wings of gold who'd looked at them and seen children instead of threats, who'd tried to protect them, who died taking rounds meant for Bubbles, then somehow came back just long enough to show them the way home. She told us to hold on to our innocence, Blossom whispered, exhausted. To never let the darkness convince us that cruelty was strength. But, Professor, her voice broke. We killed people. So many people. They were trying to kill us, but we killed them first, and I don't know if we're still good after that. Professor Utonium was silent for a long moment, processing horrors his daughters shouldn't have had to face for decades, if ever. He thought about the sugar and spice and everything nice he'd mixed together in this very lab. About the accidental chemical X that had given them power beyond measure. About how he'd created 3 perfect beings and sent them out to fight monsters, never once considering that somewhere in some other reality, they might be the monsters everyone feared. Come here. He guided them to the observation couch where they'd spent countless evenings watching cartoons and eating ice cream after particularly difficult battles with Mojo Jojo or the Gangrene Gang. Simple fights. Enemies who got arrested, not killed. Now his girls curled against him, small and frightened, while he searched for words that might help. When I created you, he began carefully, I never imagined you'd have to face anything like what you've just described. Townsville's villains, are they manageable? They're part of a world that still has rules, still has mercy, still believes in second chances. What you encountered. He paused, trying to find framework for the unfindable. That was a universe built on survival at any cost, where compassion is seen as weakness, where the greater good justifies any atrocity. Does that make what we did okay? Buttercup asked, her usual aggressive confidence completely absent. Because we were just trying to survive? No. The professor's honesty was gentle, but absolute. Taking life is never okay, but sometimes it's necessary. Sometimes the only choices are terrible ones, and you pick the least terrible and live with the weight of it. He looked at each of them in turn. You didn't start that fight. You didn't ask to be thrown into that nightmare. You defended yourselves and each other against people who would have killed you without hesitation or remorse. That doesn't make you monsters. That makes you survivors. But we're supposed to be heroes, Blossom said quietly. Heroes save everyone. They don't. She couldn't say it. Didn't need to. Heroes do their best with what they're given, the professor countered. And sometimes their best isn't enough. Sometimes the world is too broken to save. That doesn't make you failures. That makes you human. He caught himself. Well, not literally human, but you understand what I mean. Despite everything, Buttercup almost smiled at that. Almost. The woman with the wings, Bubbles said softly. Celestine. She said some places will extinguish lights like ours, rather than be illuminated. She was right, wasn't she? That universe didn't want us to exist. Then it's fortunate you're no longer there. The professor held them tighter. Listen to me, all three of you. Not every world needs saving. Not every universe wants heroes. Some places are so far gone that trying to fix them will only destroy you in the process. That doesn't make you weak or cowardly for leaving. That makes you wise. He paused, feeling something small and hard digging into his side. Reached down and found a tiny crystal in Blossom's pocket, no larger than a pebble, still pulsing faintly with residual energy. The last fragment of Chemical X that had broken off during their transit between worlds. Is this, he asked, the piece we left behind? Blossom confirmed. She took it from his hand, held it up to the light. We used it to open the portal home, but a small fragment stayed in our pockets during the transit. I think if we wanted to, we could use it to go back, to open that doorway again. The three sisters looked at the crystal, looked at each other, and without needing to discuss it, they knew what had to be done. Blossom stood and walked to the chemical containment disposal unit built into the lab's wall. She held the fragment over the receptacle, watching light refract through its facets one final time. Then she looked at her sisters. Together, she asked. Together, Buttercup and Bubbles confirmed. They placed their hands on the crystal simultaneously. For a moment, Chemical X recognized Chemical X, resonating with harmonic frequencies that sang of power and possibility. Then Buttercup clenched her fist and the fragment shattered. Pieces fell into the disposal unit, where industrial-grade acid would dissolve them into base elements. The last connection to that other universe severed forever. Bubbles let out a breath she'd been holding for what felt like years. I'm glad, she said simply. I never want to go back there. I never want to see that darkness again. Me neither. Buttercup agreed, surprising no one. One grim, dark nightmare dimension is enough for a lifetime. Blossom just nodded, but her shoulders relaxed fractionally. The door was closed, locked, sealed. They'd never have to face that horror again. Never have to choose between their lives and someone else's. Never have to hear whispers promising easy solutions that would cost them everything. Professor Utonium watched his daughters choose safety over power wisdom, over pride. Watched them willingly cut themselves off from an entire universe rather than risk being pulled back into its darkness. And he felt fierce pride, mixed with profound relief. Now, he said, forcing brightness into his voice. I believe we were supposed to have ice cream before all this happened. And if I recall correctly, someone promised to help me test the new flavor combinations I've been working on. Ice cream sounds perfect, Blossom said, managing a genuine smile for the first time since their return. Can we watch cartoons too? Bubbles asked hopefully. Absolutely. Nothing but cartoons for the rest of the day, maybe the rest of the week. The professor stood guiding them toward the stairs leading up to the house proper. And tomorrow, we're taking a vacation. Somewhere peaceful, somewhere with sunshine and beaches and absolutely no interdimensional portals. Professor. Buttercup caught his sleeve as they reached the door. What you said before, about not being heroes of every universe. Did you mean it? That it's okay to just be heroes here? Where people want us? The professor knelt, bringing himself to eye level with the small, green-eyed girl who'd probably killed more enemy combatants in 3 days than most soldiers saw in a career. He placed a hand on her head, the same gesture Celestine had given Blossom in that final moment before goodbye. "You are not heroes of every universe," he said gently. "You don't need to be. The multiverse is infinite, and infinite need would destroy even you eventually. But here in Townsville, in this world that created you and loves you," he pulled all 3 into one more embrace. "Here you will always be exactly the heroes we need. My heroes, my girls." Outside Townsville went about its evening. Citizens walked dogs and bought groceries and complained about traffic. A news helicopter circled downtown, reporting on a minor traffic accident. The hotline sat silent in City Hall, waiting for the next crisis that would inevitably come. But in Professor Utonium's house, 3 children who'd seen the worst the multiverse had to offer were finally home. Finally safe. Finally allowed to be what they'd always been, underneath the power and responsibility and impossible expectations. Just 3 little girls who loved their father and needed ice cream and deserved to watch cartoons without worrying that the next knock on the door might be soldiers coming to purge them as abominations. In a galaxy far away and forever out of reach, the Imperium of man continued its endless war against darkness. Armies marched. Worlds burned. The God Emperor sat entombed on his golden throne, sustaining mankind through suffering beyond comprehension. And somewhere in that grim darkness, a living saint stood on a battlefield and remembered 3 children who'd shown her that innocence could still exist even in a universe that had forgotten what the word meant. But here now, in this small house on the edge of Townsville, there was only light, only laughter, only the sound of 3 voices arguing cheerfully about ice cream flavors while their creators smiled and thanked whatever force had brought them back whole. They were not heroes of every universe. They didn't need to be. They were home, and that was enough.